So, it's been a while. Let's see here. Yeah, I'm smiling a little bit. There's nothing wrong with that, right? PJ, what are you reading again? Tell the audience. Let me see. Let me see that. The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe by C.S. Lewis. One of the Chronicles of Narnia. Like I said,
7 books in all.
Yeah, I know that, PJ. But the point is, that's one of, like I said, the first time I ever heard that book, even heard of it, was in my 3rd grade class, in grade school, elementary school. And it's when the teacher, Mrs. Leeper, was reading from it to the class. She used to read several books out loud, and that was one of the books she read.
Did you like it?
It was okay. It was a little different, if you're not used to that kind of book, and I wasn't as used to it back then. It's a little different,
Do you think it's a little twist on the basic battle of good and evil?
Well, actually, C.S. Lewis was meaning to be a very strong allegory about a lot of things having to do with that sort of stuff. If you have you read it through all the way to the end?
I've read every book, including the final one.
Remember the part where Edward is about to die?
Edward?
Edward?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I even read, the last book, the last battle, and near the end is let me get the book so I can read it, because it's hard to describe the ending of that book, because it's hard to describe without reading it. That's what made me think that was that, and it says, as he spoke, he no longer looked like a lion, but the things that began to happen that were so great, so beautiful, that I cannot write them. Basically, I think he was transforming from a lion into a man, into an angel. I think he was transforming into what we humans know him as Jesus.
Ah, okay, so that's...
Because they were in the true Narnia.
Oh, okay.
In the end, at least 3 of the main characters, the 3 of the Pevensies is dead. Susan is no longer a friend of Narnia. And their cousin, one of their cousins, I forget his name, but visited Narnia in the Voyage of the Dawn Treader, was there too.
Oh, okay. Well,
along with Tyr, the final king.
Oh yeah, I do remember the end of the first book where they had the 4 thrones, the brothers and sisters being crowned kings and queens.
Hey, did you know that's not actually the first book, but the second book?
Well, it's been a while. I thought I remembered it being from the first book, but oh well. Maybe my memory is playing tricks on me.
I think that was originally may have been the first book, but in reality, this is the first book. Magician's Nephew. It basically shows how the witch Jadis from the Lion Witch Wardrobe. In this book, she's portrayed as the last queen of charm, which she herself destroyed with a word though that they call a secret that they call the deplorable word.
Okay, well, I didn't know about that one. That one I did not know about.
In that book, she comes into Narnia when it was just being born, along with that old professor from the Pevensies.
Okay, but on a different note, have you taken your medicine for the night?
Not yet. Thanks for reminding me.
Hard to get him away from his subject once he gets started. He's just as bad as me in some ways. Get fixated on something. It's pretty funny. Anyway. So, I'm trying to remember which webcast this is. It's been a while.
Yes, it has.
It's been a while since I felt in the mood for this kind of thing. Hey, honey? Still too late for a haircut?
No,
Is it too late for a haircut?
it is small.
Sure. This can be the before webcast. Then tomorrow I'll do the after webcast.
What?
This can be the before webcast, and then tomorrow I'll do the after haircut webcast.
You must be dozing.
Yeah, if you're dozing, I don't want you cutting my hair.
I heard her snoring from over here a little while ago. I went in there just to be sure, and I heard a snoring sound coming right from her chair.
Okay,
I knew she was asleep.
Okay, PJ, enough. Anyway, you should be going to the restroom and get ready for bed. Love you, dear.
Love you.
Did you hear what I said? Please don't take offense to that. It's just common sense. I don't want anyone who's story cutting my hair doze off and I might lose an ear. Love you. Love you, dear.
Love you.
Oh, goodness. Oh, goodness. Where's that book? Oh, one of the books I've been reading. Let me see. Interesting. I do remember that thing about that book that he was reading from. I do remember that since he brought it up, that is what Aslan is supposed to be. It's supposed to be Jesus, I believe. But if I remember correctly, the story. But anyway, where was I? Where was this? Where was I in this book? Have I lost my place? I think I have. Oh, I read it about 50 times. Let's see. The Guns of the South. Guns of the South. Let's see here.
And what's it about?
Guns of the South. It's about a different way of the Civil War ending. South Africans go back in time and they change the course of the Civil War. They give the Confederate Army, or sell the Confederate Army, but at a really, really cheap price, ridiculously cheap price, AK-47s, which really changes the course of the war.
Yeah.
Of course.
They would be able to decimate the North with that type of.
Well, they did a lot of damage on that one. Let me see. Where was it? Where was I in that? Not that far yet.
Your page was turned over last I remember.
Yeah. Well. There it is. Oh, there you go. When Mr. Caudell is giving his lesson. Let me see. The two boys stared at him in admiration. The smaller children listened too. Some of them trying very well not trying. Sorry, some of them trying not very well to pretend they weren't doing any such thing. But you weren't afraid for you, Mr. Caudell? Jesse asked, obviously confident of the answer. They made you first sergeant, so they must have known you'd never be afraid.
Anybody who's not afraid is either very foolish or very stupid.
Well, enough. Just let me read. Let me read for a little bit, BJ. Anyway, where was I? Oh yeah. One of the reasons Caudell had been made first sergeant was that the man in that position did much of his company's record keeping and so needed to have neat handwriting. That would have ruled me out right there. My penmanship is terrible. I mean, I know how to read very well, obviously, but handwriting? No. Not with my nerve damage. It's not gonna happen. My wife calls my handwriting chicken scratch. They can do that. Chicken scratch, yeah. Anyway, he wondered what Jesse and William would say to that. Their idea of war did not include such mundane details. He answered, "Anyone who isn't scared when people shoot at him, well, he's a fool, if you ask me." The youths laughed as if he'd said something funny. They thought he was being modest. He knew he wasn't. As with Rayford Lyles, he faced a chasm of incomprehension he could not bridge. He finished his last hoe cake, wiped his hands on his pants, went behind a tree himself, then walked back into the schoolroom and resumed lessons. He sometimes thought that if he ever quit teaching, he could join a circus as a juggler, with a room full of children of different ages. He needed to keep busy the ones he wasn't actually instructing at any given moment. When the 8-year-olds were doing addition in Davy's primary arithmetic, the 12-year-olds were parsing sentences from Bullion's English grammar. Meanwhile, Jesse and William practiced their elocution. William putting fire into Patrick Henry's...
Excuse me, Dan, they're what?
Elocution.
What's that?
Well, let me give you a textbook definition of elocution. Since given how late it is and how tired I am, I may not get it precisely right. I'm not perfectly tired.
That's a word I've never heard before.
I may not remember exactly. I'm not so tired I can't think, but remembering some details might be, Remember, this is Wikipedia, but Wikipedia is not totally always wrong. Sometimes they get it right. See.
I don't think I trust anything with it.
Well, I can go with a different source. Let me see. Merriam-Webster. That's an excellent source. Okay. See. Study. Let's see. Elocution. The study of how to speak clearly and in a way that is effective and socially acceptable. That's one way of putting it, I guess.
Okay, well that rules me out of being in the army.
That was not about the army. That was about their classes. That was about their lessons. Although it doesn't help it doesn't hurt if you're a general or something like that. BJ quit doing that to the chair. Anyway, if it doesn't hurt if you're a general, for example, at least in those days, to be able to give a speech or something to your troops. Anyway, where was it? Oh yeah, William putting fire into Patrick Henry's "Give me liberty or give me death." PJ, I saw those privateers. Quit that. Anyway,
I knew you'd see it. That's why I put them there.
you only have 20 minutes before you got to go to bed. You know that, right?
Yeah.
I would use your time wisely. Anyway, Jesse giving William Yancey's tribute to Jefferson Davis on Davis's becoming provisional president at Montgomery less than 4 years before. "The man and the hour have met," William declared loudly. Some of the younger children clapped. Claudel dismissed his clutch of scholars about half an hour before sunset, to let the ones who did not live in town, the vast majority, find their way home to their farms before it got dark. A few local children, Colonel Faribault's sons, the daughter of the Justice of the Peace, did not attend his school because they were off at fancy, expensive private academies. Far more stayed away because they worked in the field all day long, all year long. That saddened me. Many of these children would still be living when the 20th century rolled around, and would have not a letter to their names. Of course, if they came to school instead of working in the fields, they might be less likely to be living still in that distant day, for small farms needed every hand they could get just to make ends meet. After his students were gone, he straightened up benches and cleared away trash. He shut the door behind him, a door whose lock had long since rusted into uselessness. Little inside was worth stealing anyhow. The school boasted neither blackboard, globe, charts, nor much of anything else in the way of equipment. There we go. Caudell looked back over his shoulder as he walked up Austin Street. "Yep, I'm about it," he said to no one in particular. He kept on walking. The bell jingled as Caudell went into the general store. "Today, Mr. Lyles," he demanded, "are we ever going to find out who won up north?" A week and a half after the election, its results remained in doubt. Finally, Rayford Lyles grinned at him. "Got me a couple of copies of Thursday's Raleigh, North Carolina Evening Standard, one of the Raleigh Constitution, and even one of the Wilmington Journal. You just go ahead and take your pick, though they all tell what you want to know." "About time," Caudell said. "Get me an Evening Standard, then." He slapped 7 cents down on the counter. The storekeeper gave him his paper. The headline leaped out at him: "Horatio Seymour elected President of the United States." In slightly smaller letters, the subhead proclaimed, "Black Republicans repudiated at polls." Caudell took a deep breath. "So they turned him out, did they?" "Looks that way," Lyles agreed cheerfully. The more the story Caudell read, the more misleading the subhead looked. He'd already known the election was very tight. With most of the results in at last, it looked as close as a mini ball cracking by one's head. Lincoln, in fact, had taken 12 states to Seymour's 10. McClellan won tiny conservative Delaware and his home state of New Jersey, while Fremont prevailed only in radical Kansas. But Seymour won the states that counted. Among them, New York, Ohio, and Pennsylvania gave him 80 of his 138 electoral votes, while Lincoln garnered 83. McClellan 10, and Fremont but 3. Out of more than 4 million votes cast, Seymour led Lincoln by only 33,000. Lyles had been reading the papers too. Oh, that's enough for now. I might read some more excerpts later. But you see, it's kind of an interesting reverse or alternate election result there. Of course, the real election result in 1864 went very differently. We had 2 major candidates, and Lincoln actually won that one, of course. So that's another thing there. Another major candidate, of course, was McClellan, who was actually the Democratic nominee that year. Anyway, that's enough of that for now. Yeah. Okay, what else is new? Okay. I suppose I've been rambling a little bit in some of these webcasts, the few I've given so far. Let me see what else. PJ, you got about 13 minutes left?
Yeah.
Okay, just pointing that out. So, think of what I was going to talk about. Oh yeah, what brought this up really in mind, for the most part, was the whole subject of history, which really I find rather fascinating. PJ, can you hand me that notebook and a pen? Yeah, the notebook and a pen. And if you look at my handwriting, if I show it to you, you'll see what I mean by calling it chicken scratch.
I don't see the pen.
There should be a pen right around. Oh, good grief, PJ! Last I checked, there was one. You don't see a pen?
No.
Go in there and see if you can find a pen.
Okay.
Could have sworn I saw a pen there. I sent him to get a pen because he couldn't find one on the table. Sorry there, am I disturbing you? Anyway. Okay. Alright. So. So.
Show him your handwriting.
Yeah. Anyway.
Your chicken scratch.
Yeah, you had to remind me. Anyway.
You actually brought it up.
Yes, but I didn't mean for you to dwell on it. They'd see it enough, soon enough themselves.
If they can see it.
If they can see it, yeah. So, anyway. That's one of my favorite periods of history, of course, was the Civil War era. There's a lot of issues that relate to that era that are still affecting us today. Really, think about it. I mean, the whole concept of how big the government should be, the role of government, the rights of the states versus the rights of the central government, and so forth. The powers of the central government, the enumerated powers, whether or not the federal government can do certain things, whether or not the states can do certain things, that kind of stuff. I happen to believe that the federal government is limited, particularly Congress it mentions, but there's also limitations on the executive, of course, is limited to the enumerated powers. The enumerated powers are not something that are really leave a lot of wiggle room or leeway, not really a lot of gray area, as far as I could tell. The enumerated powers are spelled out pretty well in Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution. And I might add, there are limitations on the executive. I might read off for you the full text of Article 1, Section 1 of the Constitution. Let me see. Article 1, Section 1. Constitution. Okay, now the site here is something called the Legal Information Institute. It's affiliated with Cornell University Law School. We're not talking about like Wikipedia. We're talking about a much more reputable source. Okay, let me see. Article 1, Section 1 of the Constitution. And I'll read it off now. All legislative powers herein granted shall be vested in a Congress of the United States, which shall consist of a Senate and House of Representatives. All legislative powers herein granted shall be vested in the Congress of the United States. All legislative powers. Doesn't really leave much room for any doubt. We're not talking about any kind of real debatability here. We're talking about the exclusive authority over legislation given to the Congress of the United States. So Congress actually has the sole right, the sole authority to make laws as far as the federal level is concerned. Congress and Congress alone cannot. The president cannot make law by executive order, which this president's been really bad about trying to do. And unfortunately, people have been following it, even though it's not really constitutionally valid. President Obama has really been bad about this, but he's not been alone. Let's be fair here. President Bush during his administration did a lot of the same kind of stuff, not to the same degree, not so blatantly or brazenly, but he did do a lot of that same stuff. And President Clinton before him, in fact, you had this real piece of work. What's his name? Paul Begala, who used to say,
Good night.
"Good night, PJ." It's talking, but anyway, good night. Anyway, Paul Begala used to say, quote, "Stroke of a pen along the land. Pretty neat." Really, pretty neat, huh? Yeah, if your idea of neatness is tyranny, despotism, rule by decree, ruled by presidential decree or executive edict, and, well, look at where that precedent got the Weimar Republic. The last 3 years or so of that was ruled by decree. First Bruning, and then Papen, and then Schleicher, and then later, of course, Hitler. And you had the presidential decrees that President Paul von Hindenburg used to issue. President von Hindenburg, of course, was trying supposedly to save constitutionality, trying to save the republic and so forth. But he did it by extra legal, extra constitutional means, by abusing his power to issue decrees. A very dangerous power they gave him. They probably didn't realize just how much it would be used. In the last 3 years of the Weimar Republic, they were used extensively, almost exclusively. The argument being the Reichstag had become incapable of passing any meaningful legislation, that had been broken down so that they had to, perforce, they had no choice but to govern by emergency legislation through presidential decree. Of course, where we see where that ended up, you had the Reichstag fire decree. If I remember correctly, it's February 28th, 1933. Right after the Reichstag fire, obviously, which gave it its name, which was actually, really, if you think about it, the end of the Weimar Republic as such. It gave Hitler the power that he needed to do what he needed to do. The Enabling Act, which followed shortly afterwards, was just the final stroke of the pen to kind of signal that it was going to last for a while, but it really ended, as one writer, I'm trying to remember which one, but it was Joachim Fest or William Milshire. I'm trying to remember which one put it, as it really ended with the Reichstag fire decree. Gave Hitler the legal means, the mechanism of turning his government from a shaky coalition government into a dictatorship. Used that decree to arrest his opponents, to put down any dissent, to make the SA, the deputized police of Prussia and so forth, highly extra legal police. Obviously, they did a lot of extra judicial stuff. They started introducing the concentration camps and other brilliant idea of theirs. If by brilliant you mean evil genius, you know. Work of Hermann Goering, as I recall. But anyway, the what was I going to say? I lose track so easily, especially when I'm this tired. This is usually when I end up doing this kind of stuff. That's a very dangerous precedent. Extremely dangerous. You have that situation. You might think, well, this president can be trusted. Well, maybe not. What about his successor? Who will follow that precedent and carry it out? Little by little. And a lot of this started under Lincoln, really. Lincoln used a lot of these emergency powers in the name of winning the Civil War. In the name of restoring the Union by force. Restoring or preserving, depending on your point of view about the legality of secession, of course. I happen to hold the view that secession is perfectly legal. It was misused by the South. They seceded for reasons I think were rather pathetic or petty or whatever, but that's just my personal opinion. But it was legal. They had the right. Whether or not they should have done it, then again, in hindsight, the way Lincoln behaved, maybe they figured him out better than anyone realized. But in any case, it should be noted that the South did some rather nasty things too. They threatened all kinds of consequences against any kind of officer who commanded black troops. They re-enslaved people in some cases who were captured. They massacred some people. At least General Forrest did that. They massacred people at Fort Pillow, of course. And of course, there was the situation with Andersonville, which was prompted when the first, if not the very first, war crimes trial. Captain Wirtz was hanged for that, if I remember correctly. And understandably so, the way he treated the federal prisoners of war in his camp, his prisoner camp. Of course, there were other prisons like that. Libby Prison was really a notorious prison as well. And then, of course, there were northern prisons that were rather rough, too, where they kept the Confederate prisoners. And, of course, when the President, Lincoln, decided not to exchange the prisoners, it got worse for them. Many of them actually starved to death. So there is that problem. And, of course, on the other end, same thing happened to federal prisoners in Confederate custody. A lot of them starved to death. So there is that. But let me just read off the Article 1, Section 8 powers. I think that this is relevant. We discussed the fact that the powers that the federal government has, at least legislatively, belong exclusively to the Congress, not to any federal agencies, not to the FEC or the FTC or the FCC or anything like that. Those are illegal, unconstitutional agencies that exist because the government has basically trespassed the Constitution and expanded its power. The federal government in particular, and the executive and so forth, has exceeded its powers, its lawful powers under the Constitution. Let me see here. Reading off this part is also relevant, though. This is where it gets into violations of states' rights. One second. Okay, Article 1, Section 8. The Congress shall have power to lay and collect duties, collected taxes, duties, imposts, and excises. Are you okay, dear?
Where are you going?
I was reading something off.
Why?
Because it might be relevant
For what?
for what I was discussing. You okay, dear?
Mm-hmm.
Love you. Am I bothering you, son? Okay. Anyway. Next, this is to pay the debts and provide for the common defense and general welfare of the United States. But all duties, imposts, and excises shall be uniform throughout the United States. Well, that's interesting. Okay, anyway. To borrow money on the credit of the United States. To regulate commerce with foreign nations. And among the several states. And with the Indian tribes. Oh, yes. Now, we've already touched on two of the rather most frequently abused clauses in Article 1, Section 8. One is the General Welfare Clause. General Welfare Clause, of course, is used in many cases to argue, well, this is the interest of the general welfare, so therefore Congress has the power to do this, so forth and so forth. It's a very sketchy, questionable thing, especially since all it really refers to here is, and I quote, provide for the common defense and general welfare of the United States. Provide for. The general well-being of the United States. Provide for it. How are you providing for it? In other words, essentially appropriating the money necessary for the basic things that the federal government does in the interest of the public welfare of the several states. It does not mean that it has the power to just regulate everything in general in the interest of the people and so forth, or whatever, as they interpret it. The other, of course, another one is the borrowing of money. This has created a real, problem, a monster, as it were. If you look at the $17 trillion national debt, if you look at the fact that frankly, we're not even able to pay the interest on the debt, let alone the entire debt. I mean, good grief. That's pretty scary. I mean, assuming that we don't default, our great-grandchildren could still be paying this debt, and probably with no prospect of, seeing it go down anytime soon. Then, of course, there's the Commerce Clause, the ever-abused Commerce Clause, very popular with the centralists and socialists out there who like to argue that this gives the federal government, in particular Congress, the power to regulate just about everything under the sun. I mean, which their definition of the Commerce Clause is wide enough you could drive a Mack truck through, or an 18-wheeler or something like that, I mean, good grief. Are you serious? I mean, what's the point of even having stipulations on limitations and enumerations of powers if you're just going to grant a general grant of power? If they were going to do that, they would have already done that and spelled that out. They didn't. They stipulated what the enumerated powers are. They enumerated what the powers were of the federal government, of the Congress, of the president, and so forth. Why did they do that? Because that's the power they gave them. That's not inclusive of other powers. That's exclusive of other powers. These are the powers that they were granted. These are delegations of powers, grants of powers. States are basically saying, okay, we're giving up this much. We're not giving up any more. We're giving up this much power. Anything else, we retain. It's ours. We're not giving that up. This is what we're giving you. And why would you even bother to, say, well, this is just what we're allowed to do. But in general, you're allowed to do anything else too. What would be the point? It's ridiculous. It's illogical to even think such. It defies all logic to say that, well, they're going to grant a general grant of power, but they're going to bother to stipulate and enumerate all these general powers. I mean, there could be no end to such things, So, logically, they wouldn't be able to fit it on a page, or 2 or 3 or several pages. What's the point? just create a king and get it over with. Just about close to what Alexander Hamilton wanted. Truth be told, a king in all but name. So the very fact that they did, in fact, list the powers, enumerate the powers, stipulate what they were, shows that they were limited by definition. That's the same reason why they were hesitant to list the rights. Some of them worried that if they list the rights, they would say, well, people would say, okay, these are your rights and this is it. Well, first of all, the federal government doesn't grant you your rights. It is only guaranteeing the rights that are already granted. And basically, these are the rights that most come to mind, and they're important enough that they're being enumerated. But that does not mean that it's the limit of the power and the rights. And that's why they have the Ninth Amendment. People say, well, you don't have this right, the freedom of travel, for example, because it's not in the other amendments. It's in the Ninth Amendment. The whole reason they have the Ninth Amendment is because they were afraid if they did stipulate these rights that they were protecting, and they did not, indicate that this was not the sum total of it, that people would say, in fact, that this was the sum total of it. And of course, unfortunately, people still say it, despite the Ninth Amendment, probably because they haven't bothered to read it. So that's another issue right there. And I would say, by the way, even if, for argument's sake, which I think is flawed, even if, for argument's sake, the Second Amendment did not grant it, did not recognize an individual right to keep and bear arms, it would be protected by the Ninth. But of course it does, and the very fact that it says the right of the people makes it pretty clear. If it was going to just be the right of the state militias, it would have been the right of the states. It was the right of the people, individually and collectively, to keep and bear arms. Shall not be infringed. That's pretty clear. I mean, if you're going to say the government or the states, you would have said the government or the states. And they would not need that kind of protection anyway. They could protect it. They could say, hey, you're not trampling on this. But it's the right of the people, the citizens. And in fact, the militia was defined in the Militia Act of 1792 by the Congress as being every able-bodied male at least age of 21. Of course, now with the way things have gone, since then, the definition would be presumed to have expanded, by now. You got the selective service system. You got all kinds of other indicators that the general unorganized militia, that is to say the general body politic of the United States, not the organized militia, but the unorganized militia, is pretty much every able-bodied adult in the country. And so you've got that right there as a definition which makes sense in a modern context, which, by the way, the argument that it would only apply to muskets is completely absurd. I mean, good grief. That would be like saying, well, our attackers are only going to come out at us with muskets too. It's silly. Who's to say that you have to be less well-armed or equally well-armed to your attackers or those who seek to take your away your freedom? What? Do they have to have muskets? I don't think so. It would be like saying, well, the printing press is protected by the freedom of speech and the freedom of press and so forth. But the modern communications, the blogs, the internet, the websites, the news media, the communications, telecommunications, broadcasting, and so forth, are not protected. It's the same logic. You're trying to say that technology changing somehow affects the protection of rights? I don't think so. The same principle still applies. The printing press was the, as it were, the blog of its day. The pamphlets were they were the equivalent of in their time. It was just the available technology they had to disseminate their information. So that, of course, is just an example of the kind of thing that I wanted to discuss. I mean, these discussions, some people noted that they are somewhat rambling, but, you know, hey, I'm getting introduced to this whole medium, and it takes some adjusting, and I'm trying to get comfortable with it. And I like to discuss things that matter to me. The whole point of this for me is to introduce myself, and introduce my ideas, and introduce what I think and what I know. Share what I can, and educate and inform and entertain to some extent. Obviously, saw the little conversation with my stepson. I guess it was kind of amusing in a way. And of course, you saw me interacting with my wife, was dealing with her concerns, whatever they may have been. And of course, I think it helps to see that I am, in fact, a very real, very ordinary citizen in some ways, a very, everyday kind of person in many ways. I mean, I have a wife, I have a stepson, I have a stepdaughter. You don't see her here because she lives in Texas. Let me see. And she's 19, almost 20 years old. Scary. But she has a boyfriend. That's another issue. Well, fiance, as she calls him. I don't think they've set a wedding date. Maybe not. Maybe they have. But guess you could still be engaged without setting a wedding date. My wife and I were engaged for a while without setting a wedding date. But let me see. What was that? Okay. One thing that I note people don't seem to understand is, like I said, the 10th Amendment. The 10th Amendment actually reads, and it's pretty clear if you think about what it actually says. Let me read that off. Okay. The power is not delegated to the United States by this Constitution. By the Constitution. Yeah. Power is not delegated to the United States by the Constitution, nor prohibited by it to the states, are reserved to the states respectively, or to the people. Now, that's a very interesting statement. Fundamentally, what it really says then is that when you think about what's reserved, if you set aside something for something, that's reserving it. You get reservations for a hotel, you've reserved a room, right? You've reserved a suite or whatever. That's setting aside for your use. You're not saying, okay, well, I can rent this out to somebody else. So it's reserved for the, if it's like if you had parking, associate parking, like at my work, it's reserved for the associates, the employees. If you have, an item reserved and held for you to be picked up later, that's like a layaway or in-store pickup or something like that. That's reserved for you. That's held for you, right? That's not going to be sold to somebody else. It's being held aside. So, when you think about the word, what that word means, essentially is saying that this is in the hands of the states. This belongs rightfully to the states. It's retained by the states. They have not granted this power to the federal government. These powers have been retained by them, reserved by them. They keep that as powers. And they keep them, I might add, aside from the people from whom their own powers arrived. The people themselves. They keep them exclusively. The federal government has no claim to the powers. The United States, the United Nations definitely has no claim to those powers. And thus, you have a situation where you're really saying, okay, this is a very limited government. If following the Constitution, if following the framework set down by the framers, set down through the amendments, set down through Article 1, Section 8, you have a central government that has very restricted, very circumscribed powers. That is to say, it's very, very limited, narrow. It is not meant to be broad. It's not meant to be a vast grant of authority to a central government that will be all-powerful, unitary, centralized, and so forth. No. That is a legacy of more recent times. The progressive movement, which I believe has been very destructive to this country, of the administrations of Lincoln, of Roosevelt, both Roosevelts really, Wilson. I won't even get into what Wilson's done to this country, the harm he has done, not yet anyway. I'm tempted to, but I won't. But this is some examples. I mean, you've gotten several presidents since Johnson, Clinton, Carter, several presidents who have expanded the role of government, and I might add, they're not limited to Democrats. Sad to say. I mean, if you look at what Nixon did during his administration, creating the EPA, that's a vast power grab right there. If you look at the amount of land that's been seized by the Bureau of Land Management from the states, from the people, land that which the federal government has no right, no authority to claim, no right, no basis really for taking. You have a situation where, you know, the federal government is now the biggest landowner in the West. Scary. And if you look at what happened with the Buddy Ranch incident recently, the thing in Nevada, you know, you see what happens when someone challenges their, you know, stranglehold on land. It's very scary. They for some reason are very jealous of this power, which is not even rightfully theirs. The amount of land the federal government should own is not nearly this much. I mean, it should be things like embassies, army bases, things like that. Not, you know, just huge tracts of land owned by the federal government. That was supposed to end when the territories became states. That was supposed to be terminated. States were supposed to have land belonging to private individuals and to states to a certain extent, and of course to the various native tribes. Let's not even get into the fact that how much of this land was taken away from the various tribes by hook or by crook. And there are those who say, well, that's, you know, that's consequence of their losing a war. They lost some wars, but it wasn't just that. There was some deception involved. Whether or not all those treaties were ratified, they should have at least told them these treaties require ratification. It'd be interesting to see how many of the treaties were in fact ratified. It will be another nice research topic. But be that as it may, they should have at least informed, you know, the people with whom they were dealing that, hey, you know, folks that I speak to in Washington that have sent me, the Bureau of Indian Affairs, whoever sent you, you know, or the Army or whatever, you know, we can make this treaty, but it has to be ratified by the Senate in order to be valid. I doubt they bothered to tell anybody that. But, and of course, you have the issue of property rights. Again, we're getting into the subject of property rights. It's not a small deal. There are those who think property rights are just a rich man's thing. No. In many cases, property rights are most fiercely and rightfully protected by the smallholder, by the people who have very little that they actually own, but that is what they have. That's what they survived on. And they rightfully and zealously protect that. And I might add that in many cases where that property has been taken away, it has led to incredible misery. Look what happened to the Trail of Tears when you have not only the loss of property, but the expulsion of the 5 civilized tribes, so-called 5 civilized tribes, from their position, from their place in the Deep South. They were an integrated, assimilated, major rooted part of the South, their entire society, their entire culture in the South, and they were expelled. They were uprooted. These were called the 5 civilized tribes because essentially they were literate. In many cases they were Christian. They lived in many ways much like their neighbors. There was very little obvious difference in many cases. Not all of them, but a lot of them. We look at the case of Elias Bodino, who actually served in the Confederate Army, in Confederate Congress and so forth. You have the, maybe not the Army, but definitely the Confederate Congress, if I remember correctly. But you have cases of people who are clearly, very much a part of the fabric of the society, and they were uprooted. Why? Because somebody wanted their land. Somebody just grabbed their land. Let's just take their land. And this is the kind of greed that is really dangerous. That's the kind of greed you gotta worry about. Not the greed that says, okay, if I want to keep my stuff. No, that's not greed. That's zealous defense of your property rights. That's not greed. What is greed is wanting to take somebody else's stuff. Wanting to take what belongs to somebody else. That's avarice. That's greed. And that is where it becomes dangerous. That kind of greed is not good. Real greed is not good. Because it consists of covetousness. It consists of taking what is not yours. In the Bible, the concept is, that is dealt with, talking about the 10th commandment here. Thou shalt not covet. And it lists the things that you're not supposed to covet. Why? Because what happens when you covet? What follows? You have what inevitably results. Theft. Seizure of property. Seizure of what is not yours. You have the demonstrable case of tyranny, the ancient northern kingdom, with King Ahab, where he wanted Naboth's vineyard, and Naboth said, no, I'm not going to sell you my vineyard, it's my inheritance. Ahab whines to his wife Jezebel and talks about how horrible it is that Naboth won't sell him his vineyard. And then, of course, Jezebel has the nerve to say something like, are you not the king of Israel? And of course, what follows is a trumped-up charge, false accusation. Naboth gets falsely accused. His vineyard is seized. Classic case of tyranny. A man who is falsely, wrongly accused of something is executed. His land is seized. And what happens? One of the first cases where you see Elijah the prophet, where does he emerge? He confronts Ahab about theft of his vineyard and the judicial murder of Naboth. Taking Naboth's vineyard, but worse, taking Naboth's life. Falsely accusing him of something, having him killed so he can take his stuff. Very, very disturbing. And so you see the warning that Samuel gives the children of Israel coming to fruition, coming true, the prophecy, where he prophesied what would happen with the king. Now, they may not have believed it right then, because Saul was kind of low-key as monarchs, but by the time of Ahab, this is definitely happening. He's taking your land, he's taking your vineyards, and he warns that, and Samuel warns about that. This is what's going to happen if you have a king. You wanted a king? Well, this is what your king's going to do to you. Be careful what you wish for. And so you get that situation where property rights are disrespected. It's a very dangerous situation. But anyway, I think I've rambled enough for now. We'll discuss more later, but into this webcast, it's been almost an hour. Easily sidetracked. But anyway, good night.